Okay, so welcome back, everyone, for the Intersectoral panel, which opens a forward-looking conversation on the role of collections and collections-based organizations in advancing sustainable development, with a particular focus on the peace dimension of sustainable development that asks for peaceful, just, and inclusive societies that are free from fear and violence. To moderate the panel today, I'm delighted to invite my dear colleague, Joy Ambani, the project officer for ICROM's First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis flagship program, which aims at building peaceful and disaster-resilient communities by integrating heritage into disaster risk reduction, humanitarian aid, peace building, and climate action. Joy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose Luis, for the introduction and for inviting me to this timely conference. As Jose Luis mentioned, my name is Joy Ambani. As we convene to discuss the intersectoral collaboration for collections and peace today, I wanted to set a theme on what we're going to talk about. We start with the fundamental question the conference poses, especially for today. What does peace look like on a day-to-day basis? How can sustainable peace be built and maintained through respect for cultural diversity and heritage? And importantly, how can collections-based organization address tensions, support communities in crises, and strengthen justice and accountability? We often measure peace by the absence of war, but this only tells a small part of the story. We are referring to societies in which relationships, structures, and social and cultural processes collectively support the well-being of all members. This requires a broad vision of peace building that goes far beyond ceasefires or high-level peace agreements. It involves the everyday ways in which peace is experienced and sustained, especially through processes like safeguarding cultural heritage collections, which help address the root cause of violent conflict and create societies where everyone can live well and thrive. A lot of this was highlighted in very interesting lightning talks this afternoon. Heritage is a living cultural process deeply embedded in this vision. Collections, whether in museums, archives, or community spaces, are dynamic resources that can promote dialogue and healing. Yet, heritage carries a dual potential. It can lay foundations for lasting peace, or, if misused, can fuel divisions. As ICROM's PATH tool, the peace-building assessment tool for heritage recovery and rehabilitation shows, peace-building activities encompass a wide range of areas, including environmental and social processes, safety governance reforms, justice and rule of law, and economic livelihoods. Heritage can contribute meaningfully in many of these areas, supporting transitional justice, community healing, and livelihood recovery. However, no single actor can activate the full peace-building potential of collections alone. Intersectoral collaboration is essential to harness this potential. Archivists, museum professionals, peace builders, human rights advocates, and academic researchers all bring vital perspectives to make the collections effective, accountable, and inclusive tools for peace. And today, our panelists will explore how their sectors engage these challenges and how deeper partnerships can transform collections into active agents of peace building. Let me now take this opportunity to introduce all our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Mr. Carlos Eduardo Serrano Vasquez, the Executive Director of the International Council on Archives, who brings 20 plus years experience in cultural heritage with ICOM, UNESCO, and Colombian institutions. He currently also teaches at Sorbonne Nouvelle and has trained numerous international museum professionals in his role. Next, we also have Ms. Mona Badam Chizadeh, the coordinator of International Network of Museums for Peace. She holds a master's in museum studies and has volunteered with the Tehran Peace Museum since 2013. She has held internships in Spain, Hiroshima, and Canada, and in 2024 was appointed the INMP coordinator and executive board member. We also have with us Dr. Ellie Harrovel. who is an assistant professor in the Center for Trust, Peace, and Social Relations at the Center for Peace and Security at Coventry University in the United Kingdom. She carries out research into the relationship between peace, conflict, and heritage, and the implications for building sustainably peaceful communities. She has carried out also extensive field research across the globe and authored influential publications as well as advised practitioners on integrating heritage into peace and security efforts. And last but not least, our speaker from this morning, Mr. Paulin Regnard, independent consultant and peace building and governance expert at PGMR Consulting in France. He has 20 years experience in crisis and post-conflict context with the UN and others, including Kosovo, Haiti, South Sudan, and Congo. His work bridges peace building, development, and heritage with a focus on inclusion, memory, and resilience. The way this panel is designed, we will begin with specific questions to each of you, and the audience towards the end will also have an opportunity to engage and ask their questions directly to the panelists. So I encourage you to use the Q&A to write down your questions as the speakers speak. So let me start my first question, and this is to each of the panelists. From your perspective, how are collections and collection-based organizations currently contributing to peace and societal peacefulness? This can be whether by addressing tension, supporting cultural diversity, or responding in times of crisis. And if possible, could you also share a concrete example from your own work or experience where collections have played a role in building peace? And I'll pass first the floor to Mr. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you very much to ICRON for inviting me to this event. To respond to your question, I mean, there are several layers or several ways of how collection, and more specifically the archives, can support peace building. Like first is it's ensuring accountability, and as we have heard from some of the speakers this morning, archives and collections are key for trust building. That's why we see that in many authoritarian regimes, when it is over, they try to destroy archives and documentary collections because they know that these are an important element for accountability. And in times of peace, they are key for transparency, for democracy, for the protection of human rights. I mean, we know that many, for example, state crimes have been recognized or thanks to documentary heritage and to archives. That's the case, for example, in Argentina and Chile, that it was possible to prove that they were not isolated actions, but something systematic. So this brings us to a second layer, is the recognition of the violation of human rights and the importance of collections for the process of truth seeking. We know that truth is it's very important for resilience, for healing, and so it is important that all this is based on collections, on archives, and one example could be, for example, the Truth Commission in Colombia. This process was from the beginning conceived as an archive, like with all the standards, with all the procedures to ensure that the information was an element that will serve to peace building. And then I think the third layer, and I think this is also very important, is by enhancing the narratives that we have in our institutions, like including diverse voices, especially those for underrepresented communities, because that's the way that we can build peace or resolve conflicts, because it's not only the absence of conflict, it's like how we manage them, and how, as we saw in one of the presentations this morning, how this cultural heritage that we preserve can help to foster dialogue and to communicate the different perspective of different types of communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Carlos. I'll pass the floor to Dr. Haravel.
Thanks, Julie. That's a really interesting question to start off with. I think in a way, the presenters in the previous session did a great job of answering it already, because they really demonstrated the diversity of ways that heritage organizations and collections-based organizations are already working to build peace. And I think one of the interesting aspects I find when I'm training heritage practitioners on this is quite often people don't recognize that they're already doing the work. Quite often they're doing really interesting and important community-based work, and they're not actually acknowledging or seeing that this is peace work, because peace happens in the everyday. Peace is something that is a process that we build at every level. And so just because you're not working on kind of big picture international conflict doesn't mean that you're not already doing peace work. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and acknowledge that there is already this kind of really in-depth level of expertise in this area that we can build on. There's such a broad kind of selection of ways that heritage organizations intervene in this way. Carlos has just spoken about transitional justice, making peace with the past, and the role that the archives and collections can play in that. We've spoken about dialogue, which is incredibly important, as spaces for dialogue, as spaces that can inspire people to learn about each other, particularly when conflict has had kind of dehumanizing effect. That's incredibly important. Paulin, I was really happy to hear you in your previous session talk about governance, because I think it gets overlooked, but actually bringing people into heritage, into inclusive forms of governance is a really important step towards building peace, and I think something that we can think about more. I think there's a burgeoning area of thinking about how heritage and collections and engagement with collections can help us deal with trauma. Trauma often following displacement or violence sees people unmoored from their community and their sense of history. And I think that there's a really important space there that we can work with to help people. And I'd also say that these collections can inspire people. So you asked for a concrete example. My other hat, as well as being an academic, is I'm also a trustee of the Peace Museum here in the UK. It's the only museum that is dedicated to stories of peace activism and conscientious objectors and so on. And what I've noticed here is that really having a space that says, especially at a moment when we're seeing a rising tide of global violence, when, especially in Europe, the narrative is about rearming and going back to a time of kind of high levels of conflict, having a space that shows that things can be different and you can stand and insist on working in peaceful ways and working for peace. It's really important to remember that you can swim against the tide, and there are other ways of being and living. And we've imagined the Peace Museum as a space of dialogue to bring people together to discuss these difficult issues, to have difficult conversations. And one point I'd really underline on that is dialogue doesn't have to end up with shared understandings. Dialogue isn't only valuable when you get to shared narratives at the end. The act of coming together and listening to someone else's perspective, listening to someone else's worldview, even if you don't end up going away sharing it, is a really important peacemaking, peace-building process. And I think that heritage institutions can find a way into peace work through that's really important. I'll leave it there for the moment, but I've so much to say on any of those points.
Thank you so much. And if it's all right, I'll also, for the sake of audience, ask you to kind of differentiate the difference between peacemaking and peace building, as you mentioned, before we move on to the next panelist as well, please.
I think the easiest way to say that is I think it's best if we talk in terms of peace building. When we talk about peace building, we're talking about addressing the root causes of conflict. Now, if you are in a situation where you're under direct bombardment, for example, or you're living in a situation of extreme violence, peacemaking is incredibly important. Stopping the direct violence, stopping the bombs from falling is number one, the priority, of course. But we need to go deeper in order to have that as a lasting and sustainable peace. And so peace building is going beyond stopping that direct violence, but saying, how do we address the root causes of these conflicts to make sure that we have a peace that lasts, a peace in which everyone is equal, and a peace in which our children and our future will be able to live freely and live well together. So it's looking at the relational aspects of conflict, looking at the structural imbalances that cause conflict, and taking that kind of longer term root and branch review of a situation rather than just seeking to stop the immediate violence.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I will now pass the floor to Mr. Paulin. Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry. There we go.
Yeah, but I think that when it comes to peace, I think it's important also that it starts when people, feel really safe. Without a sense of safety, you cannot enjoy your rights. You cannot go about your daily life. You cannot even start, speaking to your neighbor. And so I think that this is the first thing to start from. Anytime, colleagues and I, we asked, people what was the priority number one, they would start saying, peace, even just, safety, safe enough to access the clinic, to go to your field, to go to your to travel to the market, et cetera, et cetera. So, this is this sense of physical safety that is actually fundamental. Having said that, bearing this in mind, I think that in this kind of a context where peace remains, fragile, it can be very, very elusive. It's important to bear in mind that collections can help in various ways, especially when they really act as public services, when they make the rights of people really visible, legible, and when people feel that things are starting to go back to the normal. So I would like to mention like three big themes. First of all, the idea of justice and rights. When basically you have records that are available and that enable due process. For example, by allowing people to get access to vital documents related to their identity, to their land, to their pensions, etc. Or when you have evidence-bearing records and that enable people eventually to seek legal aid or psychosocial support, this can be extremely important and you already have like one piece in the peace, architecture, if you will. And also to bear in mind that collections, spaces can provide areas where you can, get, trusted and valuable information. They can actually act as safe information spaces where not only you can get, useful, advice on things that matter to your daily life, but also on information that can help counter rumor and hate speech. And this is also very valuable in places where you have a lot of social division. So it's important that to bear in mind this justice and rights aspect, and also to have a number. This is also another point that I would like to mention. There's also this issue of inclusivity, which is, of course, becoming a bit of a buzzword, but that matters. And what do we mean by that? It's once again to have a space where people can convene for dialogue, and what I mean by people is like citizens from all social groups, authorities, in particular also I'm thinking about underrepresented segments of people, and to discuss and to engage sometimes around contested histories, to share also what brings them together, etc. So if properly designed, cultural institutions and in particular collections areas can provide places that can model in a way participation through shared curations, through shared narratives, etc. And then lately you have cohesion, social cohesion. Once again, it's important to keep in mind that in places where peace remains to be built, you have a lot of grievances, you have a lot of frustrations. People are not happy in a way, they don't feel at peace. So how do you actually use collections as a bit of a remedy to assuage these feelings and through an inclusive approach? And so also this can be done. People have to feel that somehow by approaching whether it's the local library or the archives. I mean, something like a very simple space that don't feel intimidated, that they feel welcome, that institutions actually reflect their needs and their identity. I mean, to start with, something very basic, and actually this is something that always kind of surprised me. In the vast majority of cases, cultural institutions provide the information in a dominant language that is not even understood by the population. Or sometimes the language of a minority groups somehow got erased, over time. And so people simply just don't get information in their primarily language. What does that mean? It's like a barrier, and so this has to be corrected. I would say that this linguistic dimension, which is often overlooked, has to be taken into account. And also, I would say that anything that can also demonstrate that that data is safely handled, that all groups, men and women, are also looked after, in an equal and fair manner, that basically fairness standards are respected. This goes also a long way in also sowing the seeds of peace. So I'm going to stop right now, because otherwise I can go on and on, but I'll be happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll now pass the floor to Ms. Mona. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julie. And I'd like to express my appreciation for this opportunity, for my involvement in this timely conference. Well, I'd like to start with introducing a term that is called Museums for Peace in the field of peace museology. This Museums for Peace term refers to museums that work for peace, regardless of the title of peace in their title. So it could include a diverse range of museums that are actively trying to promote peace and educate their visitors about peace through tangible or intangible heritage. Reflecting that, the International Network of Peace Museums revised its title to International Network of Museums for Peace to include a more diverse range of museums, and to encourage museums and to tell them that you don't need to be necessarily a peace museum to work for peace. So you can always use your collections to promote peace. This is really interesting and important when we talk about promoting peace in the realm of museums. And the other thing that I wanted to share regarding promoting peace through collections is that collections gives us a portrait of the culture, different cultures of each communities. So it gives us how these communities can picture the definition of peace in a unique way, in a way that that is quite different than the others, even though they all share the same goal, but it's quite diverse and different. And this gives us a tangible definition of peace, something that we don't see when we talk about peace in different disciplines. We mostly picture peace with peace dove, and that's a symbol. That's not something tangible that we can feel, but heritage can gives us this tangible idea of what peace is really about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those insights in this, that we were able to establish how collections and collections-based organizations can have agency in the process of peace building, in building trust and in advocacy. I'll move to the next question, which is also, I know that we are short on time today. So let me move to the next question, which is also for all the panelists. Looking ahead, what kinds of intersectoral collaborations would you like to see across sectors such as culture, education, justice, civil society, or beyond, that in your experience you think could strengthen the role of collections as active agents for peace and resilience? And I would like our panelists to frame it in a way that we could, if you could design an ideal partnership today across sectors, what would that look like? And let me this time start with Dr. Ellie, please.
Are you proposing to give us the funding to do it, Dewey? Because I can definitely design something if that's the case.
Don't we all wish?
I mean, I think in terms of intersectoral collaboration, that's kind of the work that I have been doing the last few years, particularly actually in partnership with ICROM, and so it's a great thing to talk about a bit. I think one of the things I'm somewhat evangelical about is we are increasingly asking heritage practitioners to work in really difficult situations, to engage in conflict-affected settings, to engage in really complex conflicts and contested narratives and histories, and that is difficult. And I think if we want people to do that well, we need to equip them with the tools to do it well. And this is really, to me, where this kind of intersectoral collaboration comes, because as Paulin pointed to, there's lots of tools within the kind of peace and conflict sector that we use and that we've got a long tradition of using to understand conflict dynamics, to understand opportunities for peace building and so on. And I think we need to make sure that those tools are made accessible to people working with cultural heritage and in a format that is meaningful and usable. So it's not just enough to say, hey, do conflict analysis, but we need to say, here is how you do conflict analysis and how it relates to cultural heritage and collections. Because we can't do effective interventions in support of peace if we don't understand the conflict dynamics, if we don't understand how the cultural heritage in question, how the collection in question has been affected by conflict, maybe how it's fed into conflict, maybe how it's impacted conflict dynamics. We don't want to work blindly here. So it's really important that we support heritage practitioners in doing that and that we give them the tools to do that. I'll give you an example that I really enjoyed of this summer. So I was able to teach on the Ready course in Riga in the summer, which was really great, working with a wonderful group of heritage practitioners from across Europe. And I had a really wonderful conversation with the librarian there, who we'd done our sessions on conflict analysis, peace building analysis. And she'd come to me and said, I think there's a conflict that's affecting my library, but I can't really get my head around it. And we talked about it, and she said, oh, it's about a book. I think there's censorship. There's a book that there was a campaign to remove it from the library, and it made me feel very uncomfortable. I'm not sure what it means. And we sat and we did a conflict analysis about, okay, so the book is not the conflict. The book is the fruit. It's the visible part of this conflict. But we worked back together around, okay, what is the conflict actually about? And discussed and decided actually it's probably around a larger conflict affecting the country around kind of conservative values versus progressive values, tradition versus modernity, that when we talked about it in that way, she said, oh yeah, that's been playing out in the Supreme Court on this issue and demonstrations on that issue. So we saw how this book and the campaign to ban the book was actually part of a much broader conflict affecting society. And when we reframed it in that way, suddenly she saw loads of opportunities in which a library could play a role in terms of providing resources, in terms of being a space for dialogue. She saw ways in which she could upskill her staff by helping them with training on how to engage in difficult conversations. And so by doing that process of conflict analysis, by bringing that process that is very well developed within the kind of peace building theme, but bringing it into a training and a format that made sense to someone working in a heritage setting, we immediately saw the fruits of that and how it enabled that librarian to think, okay, we can actually use my institution in a way that's productive there. So I think, to me, that's an example of intersectoral collaboration. And it shows that it doesn't have to be huge scale. It can be really effective on a one-to-one basis. I feel I've spoken too much there again, but I'll leave you with that as an example.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll pass the floor to Mr. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Julie. Yeah, well, if we think about an ideal partnership, I think it would be, I would put like 5 different sectors or different groups. I mean, the first, in our case, of course, would be the archives. There will be also the communities or the community-based organizations, IT institutions, public or private, international organizations such as ICROM, ICOM, ICA, ICOMOS, and the government, the local or national governments. First, because I think we need to start talking to each other. Like we do it, but not at the most effective way sometimes. So first, somebody was talking this morning about listening. So I think it has to be also an attitude from the archives with the communities and the community-based organizations. We talk about giving access, but giving access is not only about the communities as the audience, it's also giving access to the different process of an archive, how they can participate, not just a consultation mode or a focus group. Is like them being part of the process, deciding if we are talking about peace building, if we are talking about after conflict. It is important that they are part of the whole process and part of the decision-making process to say what they want to share, what they don't want to be re-victimized, for example, or how can they feel that this process can heal and not create another conflict. So first is this part of archives and communities, like in a very close dialogue. Then we want to develop projects where IT organizations and business, they support these processes, because in this we need to talk about privacy, data protection, security, blockchain, to be sure that if people want to trust what is on the archive, we need to be sure that the document that is there is the real one and has not been manipulated. So IT, it's very important for archive. Then we have these international organizations that they can foster dialogue, share experiences, good practices, and exchange of experts that can support this process and advocate for in governments to support this kind of process. So it's like a 5 different sectors working together. There is already a dialogue, but sometimes it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, but it would be great to have something where we can all work together to this. I'm sure there has been projects like that, but I think that would be the ideal partnership if we want to enhance the impact of collections for peace building. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was going to pass to Miss Mona, but I think she has disconnected, maybe due to connection issues. So, Paulin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, but I mean, from the outset, I would like to say that what is so interesting and so beautiful in a way, in places where everything is in chaos, or at least, where, peace is still, a dream, in places that are marked by armed violence, by conflicts, by political unrest, by strife, etc. It's so nice to think of collections as safe, quiet, discreet places. You can walk into a library, you can walk into museums and sort of shut yourself away from, all the mess, out there in a way. So I think this is what makes these institutions so special. But I would like to say that in fragile contexts, what I noticed many times, and not only me, I mean, in general, what we can see is that there is a complete lack of communication between the actors, between the citizens, between the institutions themselves, between even the UN agencies on the ground. Usually people just don't talk, to each other, or they talk past each other. So in order to build peace, once again, you have to create, channels for communication and enable ways to yes, to just, create dialogue at different levels. For example, between the local and the national level, between the public officials and the populations, et cetera, in order to discuss, issues of common concern. So having said that, I would like to just once again, taking my needs-based, lens, I would like to perhaps address the issue in very broad terms, at three different levels. I think that first of all, we must make sure that access to collection is safe. It's an issue of safety. You must be able to just reach the place where the collection is hosted, and once you are there, you must be able to enter it. Access somehow must be free, if not affordable. There must be somebody to welcome you. You must feel that this is not a whole adventure, but that this is a normal process for you to go from your home to the collections. So number one, question of access, and it's not always a given, as our humanitarian colleagues, fully well know. And then there is this issue of relevance or usefulness in a way. I know it may sound very pragmatic, but people are concerned with getting access to records, to actionable information, to things that matter to their daily life. It's really a matter of almost like bread and butter, getting access for example, information about jobs, about weather patterns, about health, etc. So if I go to a place where there are like records, what sort of relevant information I'm going to get out there? So there is this issue of relevance, and then there is lastly, but not less importantly, this issue of peace. Then this is when you have to consider, the peace supportive role that a collections can play. So I would really look at things through this prism, safety, relevance, and peace enhancement. And looking at these different angles, then you have different types of partnerships or collaborations that are possible. And I think it is important that when it comes to safety, for basically collaborations, partnerships to be forged between collections management on the one hand and security services on the other hand, with the police, with disaster risk reduction organizations, with perhaps even the armed forces, so that collections remain safe, and that also the roads remain open and safe to get access to those collections. So talking to security institutions and rule of law institutions is also very important. But sometimes that dialogue does not even exist. And then when it comes to relevance, access to public services, this is also a matter for collections to develop working relationships, perhaps in the form of protocols, memorandums of understanding, you name it, with service providers, maybe with the cadastre, with the civil registry, with the elections management body, etc. See whether they can create if not I would say a document center, at least a referral pathways, so that you go to the closest collection institutions, and they can tell you, oh well, we don't have the records, but this is the way, this is the procedure you can get access to this particular record. This is the authority you should go to, etc. You know what I'm talking about. You need that pathway. And then lastly, talking about peace building, then collections can also develop collaborations with civil society organizations, with also women's groups, with youth groups, with any kind of civic actors out there who has let's say a mandate, the capacity, the credibility to conduct peace work. So it looks like very complex, but this is where an outside partner, perhaps in the form of a UN peace builder, but not necessarily, it can be an NGO, etc., can bring these people together, create a kind of a multi-stakeholder framework where these issues of access, relevance, and peace can be pursued simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And also to quickly comment on that, I think it also joins really well with what Ellie was mentioning about some of these actions do already happen at a smaller scale. Sometimes this access and relevance is well understood within the community, and as you said, can be further amplified with the involvement of intersectoral collaboration. So that's very useful. Thank you. And Mona, over to you.
Thank you, Julie. Well, I strongly believe peace doesn't happen in isolation. Peace happens in collaborations. Deprivation of people from education, from collaboration with other countries has no result other than ignorance and hatred. So I'm really glad that at INMP we had this collaboration with different not just museums, but also networks, institutions, and organizations that work for peace. So part of our job is to find synergy between INMP and other organizations, and to not just include museums. Yes, the focus is on museums and heritage and collections, either tangible or intangible, but including and involving other institutes and organizations is also very important for us. The other thing that in my experience is really beneficial for such collaboration is having projects that is not just for one significant country, that can involve more countries, so they can be involved and gather different perspectives and feel that we are from one family, and this is how international collaboration can contribute to peace. Sorry, it was too short.
No, this was very useful. Thank you so much, Mona. I was also looking at now, since we've completed the formal questions, if there are any questions on the audience. However, I've also been told that we are already running late. So perhaps I'll encourage the panelists to look at the question and answer, and if you would like to contribute an answer to the question asked, please do so in writing as well. And just to now conclude this panel, I was thinking, rather than me concluding this panel, I will actually ask the panelists to give our audience one line, one sentence recommendation. If you had to recommend one immediate action that maybe archives, libraries, or museums could take to move from collaboration in principle to collaboration in action today for advancing the Sustainable Development Goal 16, in one line, what would your recommendation be? And that's how we're going to close the panel, if that's okay. So I'll pass now to Mona. Let's start with you this time.
Well, I would go definitely for education, educating museologists and curators of different types of museums to use their collections and find aspects related to peace.
Thank you. Paulin?
I would definitely look for ways to involve communities, and in particular youths, in initiatives to document everything that can be documented in their contexts, both tangible and intangible heritage, and really to put it on record. And I think it would be a wonderful job. People would feel involved, they would feel sensitized, that would work well across, communities. And also something also to bear in mind is that, remember, we talk a lot about heritage being, sometimes at the risk of being instrumentalized, but I really believe that heritage is, in fact, fundamentally apolitical. It is really cross-boundary. So by having people document and research and equipping them do this in the field, it can be something extremely useful.
Thank you. Mr. Carlos.
Thank you. I will summarize it maybe in 3 words. It's dare, propose, and collaborate. It's like dare to propose new things, innovative projects, and dare also to collaborate even with communities that usually you haven't worked before. And that's it. I think that's the that's the best advice I can give at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Harrowell.
Thank you. I mean, I think it builds a bit on what all 3 previous speakers have said. Speak to the communities around your heritage institution, the ones who care for it, and also the ones who don't, who haven't been through the doors yet, because they matter too, and find out what conflicts matter to them, and find out what they want to think about and to address, and discuss how you can support them with that, because you might be surprised. And it might not be the conflict you thought was going to be important, but it might be one that you can actually do something really valuable about.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. As we leave this panel today, let us carry forward the imperative to deepen our partnerships, listen to those that are sharing, whether positive or negative, embed peace building proactively in collection safeguard, and continuously promise to ask ourselves on how our work can contribute not just to remembering the past through collections, but also building just and peaceful futures. I take this opportunity to thank our panelists for their insights, perspectives, and experiences, and to the audience and everyone for engaging in this essential dialogue. With this, I'll pass the floor back to José Luis, and thank you once again.
Thanks, Julie, and a big thanks to you too for moderating the panel, and for our distinguished panelists again to sharing your valuable insights that will definitely inform the outputs and recommendations of this conference.